And it is a joy and delight to be here, to be in His presence, and to be with you, and to have this time to fellowship and worship together. My wife told me that I should warn you. I forgot my hearing aids today. So what I hear may not be what you say. So I'll need some grace and some patience today. This card was up here last Sunday, and it says WMF, Salem and Turkey Run Family. So I thought, oh, well, this is for the WMF. So I gave it to Jane and said, yes, it is for us, but you're supposed to read it. So from last week, it says, thank you so much for making my world a little more beautiful with your kindness. It really meant a lot. Proverbs 11:25, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Dear WMF, Salem and Turkey Run family, thank you for your generous donation that you gave our family. You're also kind and giving. We love you. God bless you, Regina, Caleb, Owen, and Paige. Also want to remind you, you can probably smell the lasagna that was cooking downstairs this morning. The fundraising lunch today, if you're not able to stay, you can get it to go. The proceeds will go to Laurel Mission. Our teenagers are hoping to go down there. We finally got a date, August 13th through the 17th. So Andy will just have to see how that works with the start of school and all of that. But we invite you to come and eat and share with us. And then also, we have updated directories. Thank you, everyone who provided the updated information. These are here for you to take so you have addresses and names and phone numbers. I think I'm remembering everything. Thank you, Lord. We have a large area that we're going to cover today. 4 chapters, basically, today and next week. And so, if you'll turn to Job 38. I'm not going to read all 4 chapters. But I will read the first 13 of chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out of the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it and set bars and doors and said, thus far shall you come and no farther, and here your proud waves be stayed. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? A few weeks ago, we saw how Job in chapter 3 finally hit bottom. Physically, he is near the point of death. The anguish is more than he can bear. He knows he's done nothing wrong to deserve what appears to be such severe punishment, but not being privy to the conversations of heaven, only knowing what he has experienced, Job understandably, but incorrectly, blames God and accuses God of betrayal and wrongdoing. And he challenges God's right to rule the universe. In chapter 3, Job curses his birth and all of creation and all of existence. And he does so because he believes that God has rejected him. And if he can't have God, then all of blessings and life itself hold no meaning to him. In chapter 6 and 7, he can't keep that British stiff upper lip and wait for life to rebalance. If he has lost his friendship with God, in his mind, death is the only comfort that he can receive. And then in chapters 9 and 10, Job questions God's goodness, and he actually, we don't particularly see it, but the style of writing in the Old Testament, Job brings a lawsuit against God, basically. He is suing God over his right to rule the universe. It's an ancient pattern of style of writing. And I don't know if you know Dennis Prager or know of him. He's a conservative talk show radio host I enjoy listening to if I'm in the car when he's on. But beyond that, he is also an Orthodox Jew who for over 40 years has taught the first 5 books of the Old Testament in synagogue, and he's written several books. I've got a couple of them. They're really enlightening. But Prager said something that made me kind of cock my head a little bit and think about. He said, to be Jewish is to argue with God. And I thought about that, and I thought, no, I don't know. But then I thought about Abraham. What did he do? He argued with God about the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. If there just be 10 righteous, will you spare the cities? I think about Moses. God got tired of the hard-headedness of the Jews coming out of Egypt. He said, you know, Moses, why don't I just wipe them out and start over with you? And Moses said, if you're going to do that, you might as well kill me too. And then I think about Habakkuk. He knows judgment is coming. He knows that God has stirred up the Babylonians to come against Israel. And he says, God, I know we're sinners, but how can you possibly judge us with people who are more wicked than we? And now here's Job. And Job wonders why God created him in the first place if God was just going to turn around and destroy him. And in chapters 22 through 31, we didn't spend time there, but in between debates with his friends, Job continues to criticize God. And after a rambling 6-chapter nonsensical self-righteous speech by some man named Elihu, God speaks. God responds. But before we get to God's response, I want us to look at one more thing. I got ahead of myself a couple of weeks ago, but some of you may not have been here. Some of you may have forgotten. But this thing I want to look at. After all of Job's accusations, questions, complaints, criticisms, suspicions, and temper fits, why does God not censure him, rebuke him, or punish him? In chapters 1 and 2, Job is called righteous and blameless. From chapters 3 through 31, Job sins a good bit, and yet God does not hold it against him. Why is that? It's because Job never walks away from God. The point of all of Job's argument is that he believes that God has rejected, punished, and abandoned him. And this is what causes him the most pain. Over and over again, he cries out, I want to speak to God directly. He mourns his losses, the loss of friendship, the loss of his children, the loss of his wealth. But the only thing he asks for is to be reconnected with his divine friend. He doesn't ask for his fortune to be restored. He doesn't ask for new children. He doesn't ask for the restoration of his wealth. He doesn't ask for a comfortable life. He asks for God himself. He will not curse God. He will not walk away. He is determined that he is somehow going to be reconciled with God, even if he must wait until the resurrection for that to come about. Now, God will respond in a twofold manner. And we're going to take today and next week to look at this. One part centers on the natural world. The other part centers on the supernatural world. And how does God appear? He comes in the whirlwind, as the King James calls it. He appears in the midst of the storm, the very same kind of storm that killed his children. And I find this significant for two reasons. First, what it tells me is that God is with us in the midst of calamity. He does not abandon us when our world has been ripped apart. And the second thing that it tells me is that appearing in the whirlwind aligns itself with Psalms 107 and 148, Isaiah 29, Jeremiah 23, Nahum chapter 1, Zechariah chapter 9, and Ezekiel 14, where in each of these passages, God appears in the storm, rising up to go to war against chaos and evil. Now, here's his response. The first point we'll look at today, and that is creation. Please look at chapter 38, verses 2 and 3. That word counsel means advice, guidance, a decision, a strategy that is enacted by the king. Job has spent a lot of time criticizing the way that God has ruled creation, claiming that his rule is immoral and unjust. And God addresses this, not with condensation, not with a humiliating rebuke, but with grace, as challenging a friend who needs a change in perspective. And he does, because Job has forgotten who God is. He has been so caught up in what he has experienced and what he has felt, it has gotten his whole attention, and he's lost sight of God. And I don't say that as a criticism. You and I do the same thing too. We can only see what is right in front of us. We don't have God's perspective where he sees from the beginning to the end. He has a perspective of eternity, and we do not. So his response is normal, and it's natural. He needs a change in perspective. And in answering Job, God doesn't say, hey, you weren't there. You don't know. You're just a finite creature. Instead, he asks Job rhetorical questions because he does not want to put Job in his place. He wants to draw Job nearer to himself. Yes, he's stern with Job. He's firm with him. He says, dress like a man. You know, it's like when a father comes to a son and says, sit down, we need to have a man-to-man talk. He is stern, but he's also compassionate. The purpose is not to give Job information so that God can win an argument. It's to help Job to refocus on God himself and to gain a deeper insight. God does not bully Job into submission. Rather, he invites him to come closer, and he does with us. Now let's drop down to verses 8 through 11. I love this phrase. It's really sparked my imagination in interpreting and understanding this, where it talks about God swaddling the sea. Swaddling the sea. You know, when a mother swaddles her child, they can't move a whole lot. They are snug and they're in one place. And that's what God does to the sea. Because, see, to the ancients, the sea was a scary place. Untamable, unpredictable, capable of great devastation. To them, it was a symbol of chaos and evil. That's why I take that time to explain when I have a memorial service, when God leads me to read from Revelation 21, where John said, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and there was no more sea. What John is telling us is that when Jesus comes back, and the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven, and God makes his home here with us, there will not be anything that will harm us, that will frighten us, that will cause destruction anymore. Praise God. I'm getting a little wound up. Notice here, God puts limits on the sea. It cannot cover all of creation. And this goes back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 9. And if God's care extends to the sea, a place that represents chaos, evil, rebellion, then God's goodness truly knows no bounds in our lives. This world, unfortunately, is not a paradise where things cannot go wrong. God, for the time being, allows chaos to exist, but he holds it within strict limits. And he uses it for his purposes when he chooses to do so. What do I mean by that? Just look at Jesus. His trial, his torture, his crucifixion, humanity at his worst, but God redeemed it so that you and I could live forever. Now look a little lower at verses 12 through 15. These verses may seem strange to us in the 21st century, but to the ancient people of that time, the moral order and the natural order of creation walk hand in hand, and they support one another. A stable creation indicates a stable society, and vice versa. For example, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, we find that the pursuit of idolatry leads to famine, drought, and disease. The scholar David Kleins wrote, "The principles on which the world was created mirror the principles according to which it is governed." Job cannot control the sun, but God can, and he does. Here God is telling Job that justice does indeed matter to God, and creation is one avenue by which justice is upheld in the world. For the rest of this chapter and next, God takes Job on a brief tour of the cosmos and the animal kingdom to help broaden Job's perspective. Job is first made to consider the depths of the sea, of outer space, and the underworld. He is then made to consider such things as hail, snow, frost, rain, and the positioning of the stars. And Job reminds him that only God can set these in place and direct their actions in orbits. I find hail an interesting reference that God brings that here. But we can see that in Joshua 10, Isaiah 30, and in Revelation 16, that God stores up hail, and he uses hail to deliver the helpless and to crush his enemies, their enemies. He stores up the hail for judgment because God will not forget his people, and justice matters to him. Then God spends quite a bit of time on the animal kingdom, beginning with verse 39 of chapter 38 and continuing on through all of chapter 39. Notice the choice of animals. Except for the war horse, all of the animals are wild and undomesticated. Now, the war horse is included, I believe, here because though it is tame and domesticated, it has been trained to be used for violent, destructive ends. All of these animals that are described here, we could call chaotic. You cannot domesticate them. They're untamable. They stand outside the order of human society and culture. They are opposite of what we would think as being under God's control in creation. And it's especially shown in the bizarre description of the ostrich. I mean, what are they good for except for eating, running, and sticking their head in the sand? But by highlighting these animals, God is telling Job, and God is telling us, that as messy and scary as it can be, it is not a chaotic mess about which God does nothing. God has made these animals, these wild, untamable animals, he made them this way. And he provides for them, even for them, that they may flourish. God tells us the world that he has made was very good. And his care and his grace and his provision extends to all of it. And it reaches beyond that which makes us feel safe and comfortable. And his care also includes that which we would find dangerous and incomprehensible. And in chapter 40, verses 4 and 5, Job withdraws his lawsuit. He ends his argument with God. As we close out this portion of God's response, I have three concluding thoughts. The first is, God's world is more vast, more complex, and more mysterious than we recognize. The last 150 years of human history have been utterly phenomenal, beginning with the Industrial Revolution of the mid-1800s up to today. The discoveries, the advances in knowledge and science and technology and convenience. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And the way they develop technology today, they make it so it's seamless. There's dramatic change taking place that we're not even aware of. We just adopt it and we go on. But I would argue that as much as we know and as much as we have accomplished doesn't begin to scratch the surface of the depths of the universe in this world that God has made. And so because it is more complex than what we realize, you and I are not in a position where we can extrapolate our sufferings into sweeping generalizations about God. The second thing that I would share with you, in spite of what we see on TV and hear on the radio, read in the newspaper, the world God has made is not a dark, sinister place, nor is God hostile. There is order and goodness, and God sustains and provides for these elements that are beyond our control and understanding. And then finally, and this I don't really understand but accept, but God's plan for creation does allow for some evil and chaos to exist. But within certain limits. Within certain limits. He has arranged for the care of all creatures, but he does not eliminate pain, danger, and death. And as best that I can understand, I believe it's necessary for evil to exist in order to create a choice. God didn't make us robots. I think this is my speculation. I try never to speculate from the pulpit. But I think somewhere in eternity past, when Lucifer rebelled, part of that rebellion is, God, you're not fair. You make us serve you. You make us follow you. And I think to prove a point to Satan, he wanted to show Satan, I can create a being that will love me for myself, that will love me for who I am. Because if he just made us to love him, that wouldn't really be love because there's no choice. You know, I love Tracy. I made that choice to love her. She made that choice to love me. Those of you who are married, you made those choices. You said, I'm picking you. You have to make a choice. And so it comes down to us, with the world in which we live requires us to answer the question, do we choose to love God or do we choose not to do so? Love requires a choice. So while Job ends his argument, he's still impoverished. He's still near death. He's still sitting on a garbage dump, bereft of friends and family. He still needs something more. And Lord willing, we will look at that next week. So in the meantime, Don't walk away. Don't walk away. Give him the opportunity to respond, because he will. Amen. I think again about Habakkuk. Chapter 1, he's asking God all these questions. He's questioning God's integrity. He's questioning the rightness of God's decisions. The end of chapter 1, Habakkuk in chapter 2 says, I'm going to go into the watchtower and see what he will say to me. He doesn't say I go up there to see if he will speak to me. I know he will speak. And he will speak to you. In his timing, in his way, and in a manner that will bring healing to your heart. Let's stand.